Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wool and Coffee for today, March 16th. I am joined by Dr. Kelly Gage from the Nomi Network. Some of you might remember that we at Wooland made a contribution back in November around Black Friday for the do good value of our mission. And Kelly is here to tell us a little bit more about Nomi Network and fast fashion with human trafficking and how that can affect fast fashion. So, to get started, Kelly, can you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm really happy to be here and happy to be talking to you personally, I guess, and everybody else virtually. And first of all, I just want to start off by saying thank you to Woolan and for the incredibly generous donation. It really does impact people's lives very, very directly. So a little bit about my background. I was really intrigued by this interview opportunity because I do have a PhD in apparel studies and taught in apparel programs, mainly from the business side and the merchandising side, not so much the design side. But for about 10 years before I was recruited off of the board of Nomi Network, I was on the board for about 4 years and then was recruited off of the board into the development department as a major gifts officer. And I am now the director of advancement at Nomi Network, meaning I run the entire fundraising department. And I've been there for about coming up on 5 years.
Very good. So, can you give us an idea of what Nomi Network's mission is?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our mission, I won't read the mission statement for you. That seems a little dry sometimes to people, but our mission is we are an anti-trafficking organization. However, we come at fighting trafficking and working with women and girls through a workforce development lens. We believe that every single woman and girl should have the opportunity to support themselves and their families financially and gain independence and just autonomy for themselves as they work forward. We work in a lot of areas of the world we work in Cambodia, India, and in the US, and we're working in regions or with populations that many other nonprofits don't work with. Like, just speaking specifically about India, we work in pretty remote areas and with some populations that are often viewed as not appropriate for the workforce, and so we work within those communities directly.
That sounds really powerful. So, could you tell us a little bit about human trafficking and how it might relate to the fashion industry?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like, I don't know. I mean, maybe this audience, this community that's listening has some knowledge of what is happening or what could happen in terms of human trafficking in the apparel industry, but the general public often doesn't. And you could Google and find any number of documentaries on this, but there are multiple different ways when you are looking at trafficking within the fashion industry that you could talk about. Specifically, labor trafficking that we are talking about. It is labor trafficking can fall into many different definitions, whether it is debt bondage or unpaid labor, people literally not being allowed to leave. And when you are talking about the fashion industry, it can be things like, being paid below the minimum wage, improper working conditions. When we are talking about truly the global manufacturing of clothing, it's done in factory settings. And there are a lot of factories around the world that are horrific places for people to work. And it is, I don't know how many people remember or know about the factory collapse in Bangladesh, where doors were locked and people weren't allowed to get out and they hadn't been being paid, and the building was, they'd been told that it was unsafe. So it's those type of working conditions, not having proper ventilations, cramped working conditions, as far as like the sewing machines being too close together. There are other things that also work, kind of fall into the camps of labor trafficking, human trafficking, and environmental concerns, like working in dyeing conditions where it's a really unsafe from a health-wise perspective for the workers, and then obviously polluting water systems. I was teaching when the Bangladesh factory collapse happened, and one of the classes I taught was history of fashion. And I felt like I was jumping back like 100 years, and the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire in New York. And I won't get into my whole history lesson right now, but it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is taking what was happening in the United States 100 years ago, and it's still happening in other areas of the world, of the lack of care of human beings. I will say, just kind of as you hear news stories or read news stories about, big name companies who were caught. I mean, years ago, it was, something with Nike, and, there were things with Walmart, and this was like decades ago. And it's often the case where a company based here in the US contracts with a company wherever in the world, and they vet that company, and then that company, goes down the food chain. Like they subcontract out and out and out. So it might not be the primary company that's looked at as a threat to trafficking or to labor trafficking. It might be further down the chain. So it's a very, very complicated issue, and one that I will say that, and maybe I'm jumping ahead on all of this, but when you hear about trafficking in any industry, a labor trafficking in particular, in my opinion, I don't necessarily know that in every instance, the best course of action is to go in and shut down those factories. In my opinion, it's working with those employers and helping them really understand that their bottom line can actually grow in treating their employees properly. Because if you go in and shut down a workforce opportunity for the individuals and the workers, then they're out on the streets, and there are other types of trafficking that they're going to fall prey to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely something I think most people wouldn't think of, is the ramification of closing down a factory or a business, and how some locations, every penny or cent or rupee makes such a difference in just being able to eat that week. So
yes,
definitely understand that. Thank you for sharing that. So we don't have a lot of time, but I do have two more questions for you. So first, as part of Woolian's Do Good initiative, we donated $10,000 in 2022 to the Nomi Network. And then we were informed that, or asked if it was okay if our gift of $10,000 could be matched by another $10,000. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what sort of impact that gift of $20,000 might have in terms of human trafficking victims reclaiming their lives and developing skills, or different things that Nomi Network helps control.
Absolutely. Well, I'll give a specific example about what a gift of that dollar amount, so let's say $20,000, could provide. And specifically in India, we do have a lot of our trainees go into the apparel industry. And we have an MOU with a manufacturer in India that is very above board.
Can you explain MOU?
Oh, sorry. Memorandum of Understanding. So it's basically a partnership agreement that we train the women and they hire them, which is incredible. And our cost of moving a woman through our programming is about like $1,000 to $1,500. So if let's just say it's approximately 20 women, 15 to 20 women that we can move through this programming in this training and then have them placed in these jobs. When they are placed in these professional setting jobs, they earn a very livable wage. And that is one of the premises of Nomi Network, is that we are not just giving them a skill that's going to put them, at subsistence level. We really want them to have a job that is really going to provide for them and their families and, provide schooling for their children, et cetera. So that is one way that the gifts directly impact that. And I could be here all day telling you specific stories. I was just in India, so I saw and talked to women firsthand who had gone through this training and had just an amazing experience. And I visited the factory, I love doing that stuff. So it was very fun.
So in an email, you had told me about one very special person that you had seen in 2020, and you were able to catch up with her again last week or 2 weeks ago. Could you just really quick tell us about her?
Rebecca, you shouldn't be bringing that up. You're going to make me cry. Okay. So yeah, in 2020, I was there in India right before COVID. And I met a young woman who was just in the beginning of our first phase of training. And because of COVID, everything was shut down. She was in a pretty dire living circumstance. She had 2 young children, and she was gracious enough to show us the house where she was living with other people who were in her village. I think people would probably be, kind of shocked at what the living conditions were, but, she shared that with us. And she was just one of those people. I mean, all of our women really stick with me, but for some reason, like, her face just kind of stuck in my mind, and her story, and that she showed us her home. So 3 years later, I was lucky enough to, as I said, just recently visit the same program site that I had visited 3 years ago. And I was really hoping to see her, but nobody knew whether or not she was going to be on the campus that day or not. And we walked into a room, and it was a production center where there are about 10 sewing machines. And this is a Nomi Network run operation that has contracts with local schools and things like that to make uniforms. And all of a sudden, I turned around and she was there, and she's working at a sewing machine. And I was just like, oh my gosh, and of course I don't speak Hindi, so I had to use a translator, but I, had it explained to her. I was like, we met like 3 years ago, and I showed her a picture on my phone of the 2 of us together then. And so I was asking about her children and, how her work is going, how much she's earning. And her children are in school. She's earning enough to send them to school, because you have to pay for children to go to school. And, a living wage, like earning money for herself, which she had not earned anything before she went through the Nomi Network program. And, there's story after story after story about that, about individual women. And I think that's one of the things to really remember, that a gift that is given might seem as like just dollars on paper, but it's a real person. And it's, an individual, like anybody that is working in your company, or you or I, Rebecca, and, to see the impact on those individuals' lives, and not just on their lives, but on their children's lives, or their husbands, or their parents, or, their village, is just, it's
Powerful.
It's amazing. It's very powerful. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm getting a little teary just thinking about it too. So I had mentioned previously to you that I had spent time in Nepal and worked with an orphanage there. I had some connections. I was a volunteer with Photographers Without Borders, and to be able to see the difference for the kids that they're lucky enough to attend school. And then there's children on the street that they have nothing. I mean, that can change an entire life. It can change generations. So it's so powerful. So along that note, you mentioned how sometimes on paper something just looks like dollars, but it translates so much to individuals and stories. So how can we as consumers help fight human trafficking from where we are right now?
I think one of the most important things as a consumer is to be very, very thoughtful in how you are purchasing. Know the story behind the pieces of clothing that you're buying. It's learn about the company, learn about the designer. I'm actually wearing a piece that my daughter designed, and I think that she holds a lot of the same ethos that Wool&Co does, as far as the direct connection, transparency, and manufacturing. Natural fibers, knowing who is producing the clothing, and that's not altogether typical. It's growing. It's absolutely growing. I would say if you really want to be extremely thoughtful in your clothing purchases, is first of all, know who's producing it and where it's coming from. Generally, that's easier to do with smaller manufacturers, I think. Just because can be a greater level of transparency and tracing, although, like I said, it's growing in other areas. But then also to consider buying something that is going to be in your closet for a very, very long time. That really speaks to environmental factors also in terms of production, but in terms of human trafficking, if you're buying something of higher quality that is meant to last, it has a higher level of manufacturing capability behind it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
I start talking about like specific examples, but like your products are completely above board. Where they're being manufactured. You visit the factories, where the materials are coming from. It's very, very specific, and they're pieces that are going to be able to stay in somebody's wardrobe forever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I feel like the more directly connected you can be, the closer in steps you are to the manufacturing of a product, and knowing the story it can give you a greater sense of comfort that you are in a purchasing framework that keeps you away from supporting things like labor trafficking and human trafficking.
Right. And to any of our customers that are watching this that have not been on our journal, we do have our traceable supply chain, photos of our factory, photos of the people that are sewing the garments that we sell. I was telling Kelly before the interview started, we even have photos of the break room for the employees at the sewing factory with their massage chairs in the break room, and how it's so bright and beautiful and airy. And by the time everyone is watching this, we're recording the first week of March, but it's not going to be posted until mid-March. But our development team is actually going to be in Korea the second week of March, visiting all of our supplier, locations, and meeting the people that sew these garments. And I just think that's so powerful. So I appreciate that Kelly is willing to talk to us about this. Do you have any final things to share or say, Kelly, before we sign off for the day? Not to put you on the spot.
I would say again, just be, as you're thinking about your wardrobe and thinking about purchasing, just be really thoughtful in that, and take the time to get to know that, and understand that when you are looking at a piece of clothing that seems like a great deal, like let's just say a t-shirt that's like $9, there's an individual that made that t-shirt, and you have to think about the fact, it's like, okay, if I'm paying $9 for this, how much did the person whose hands were literally on this and stitching the stitches around the collar get paid? And think about the fact is like, am I willing to spend another $2, $3, $10 to get something that I know was produced in an ethical manner? I just really, like, push that pause button. I do that for myself too. And Rebecca, I'm sure you do that for yourself too. It's like, what, we're going to think about this and think about what it is that we're purchasing.
Yeah, I did the 100-day challenge from Wool&Co a couple years ago, and it really helped me reframe how I think about my purchases and how long they're going to be part of my life, and the cost per wear. Yes. That thinking about cost per wear, how much is it going to cost me each time I wear that, really helps me decide what I should be investing in and what I can do without. So it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight, but just little by little, I think becoming more educated and being thoughtful and mindful about our actions really can make a difference. So
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just applaud what Wool&Co is doing also. And again, thank you for the support for Nomi Network. And I'm looking forward to many further interactions and connections.
thank you.